The suffering we are seeing across this region is acute. We have been hearing from several people stuck in the blockaded Gaza Strip. Here is what literature and creative writing professor Rafat Alareer told us today.
The situation in Gaza is complete and utter carnage. Israel has destroyed most infrastructure. People mostly either go to UNRWA schools, UN-run schools, or they stay with relatives. And when they stay with relatives, they become a sitting duck to Israeli fire and missiles. So there's nowhere safe, no place safe, no one is safe. We're heading towards a complete disaster, some sort of starvation. And sadly, we still expect the worst. Everybody in Gaza expects the worst.
Joining us now is Ayman Mohideen, my colleague and host of Ayman on MSNBC, who has spent years reporting from Gaza including during the 2014 war. Ayman, thank you for being here and helping us all understand the dynamics. I want to talk a little bit about Hezbollah and Hamas and the dynamic between those two organizations and sort of what your expectation is as the ground invasion looms large and Hezbollah witnesses that unfolding.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, but also some key fundamental differences. There is a very important difference in how these two organizations have stated their objectives to be. And what I mean by that is they're both part of what is called the axis of resistance. And what is that? It's Iran. It was at one point Syria when it was a little bit stronger, but certainly Hezbollah and Hamas. And it was those four that formed what they called the axis of resistance to Israel and Western imperialism in the region, so to speak. And that's how they kind of position themselves. But tactically, a little bit different than Hamas. Hezbollah is both a political movement and a military wing. Politically, it is part of the Lebanese government. And so when it makes decisions, it sees itself as part of a larger Lebanese society. And so its decisions to enter war are a lot different than, let's say, Hamas's willingness to enter the war. One of the lessons that Hezbollah learned in 2006 was that it attacked Israel. It went into this deadly war. Lebanon paid the price for that war. Hezbollah came out, declared victory, of course. And certainly, by some standards, it was victorious that it was able to withstand the might of Israel for the 30-plus days that war lasted. And because they were able to do that, they created what is often referred to as mutual deterrence. Hezbollah knows that it can unleash a lot of firepower in Israel, and Israel knows that it can unleash a lot of firepower. And as a result of that, that border has relatively been calm for the better part of 17 years. There have definitely been incidents, but no major wars like what we've seen play out with Hamas. And just to button that up, there seems to be this kind of, over the years, Hamas has learned from Hezbollah, and whether or not they have learned by actually working with them or just simply watching their tactics of acquiring rockets, having a diverse capabilities in their arsenal between rockets, Navy, special forces. They're trying to mimic themselves. And that's why a lot of people say, well, Iran obviously has fingerprints on both of these groups and is able to provide what they did with Hezbollah more recently to Hamas.
I want to talk about tactics for a second, because to some degree, there was a sort of strange relationship of a sort of utility that Hamas played for the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And there was, at least it sounds like from the outside, an expectation that Hamas would not do something as barbaric, as brutal as the attack that it launched last weekend. I'm sure you've read about the news we have from NBC. Hamas has insisted it did not harm any children, but it seems apparent from the NBC reporting that very much part of the plan, according to pamphlets and effectively directions that were found on the bodies of Hamas terrorists, was a plan to attack elementary schools, to find children and hold them hostage, if not actually kill them. That seems like and please weigh in on that. This seems like a dramatic increase in terms of the sheer terror Hamas is willing to inflict.
Yes and no. I mean, and I say no because this is an organization that has carried suicide bombs on buses and attacked civilian targets in cafes and pizzerias. And so the idea that they haven't gone after civilians before is just, let's just be very clear about that. They have always gone after civilians in Israel with the nature and with the suicide bombing.
Sure.
So this tactic, though, of deliberately targeting the schools, as is in this NBC reporting, I think it would be very significant for them to have done that. And it's important to kind of like see exactly what Israel's providing in terms of the evidence. I know that we now have that reporting based on what the document that Israel gave us, but it'll also be very interesting. And Hamas has released this video to say we didn't harm children, and they showed this like propaganda video of them taking care of some of the children on the inside.
Yes.
But the bodies and the victims tell the story. So you know that all of the people that were inside of Israel for those hours that unleashed this barbaric attack on the Israeli civilians, that's the story, right? Yeah. Whatever anyone tries to spin in and say, well, they didn't mean to or they didn't want to, or that is just nonsense, because the dead bodies of the Israeli civilians
tell the story. When we talk about tactics, we have new reporting tonight. The humanitarian group Human Rights Watch is accusing Israel of using white phosphorus. That's based on videos recorded in Lebanon and Gaza. The IDF has denied this, saying the current accusation made against the IDF regarding the use of white phosphorus in Gaza is unequivocally false. NBC News has not independently verified Human Rights Watch's claims, but white phosphorus, for those who don't know, is considered especially dangerous to civilians because it burns through flesh. Now, Israel faced similar accusations in 2009. They vowed to stop using it in 2013. You know the sort of saga of this substance and Israel's use of it through the years. I wonder what you make of this newest reporting.
So I covered the 2008 war, as you mentioned, Operation Cast Lead, and Israel used white phosphorus, and that it was clear as day for every journalist that was there. We all saw it. We all filmed it. It was a very different dynamic because there was foreign press there and people were able to actually record it. And it came out in subsequent reports and investigations that Israel had used white phosphorus. They have white phosphorus. They've used white phosphorus. As to this specific account, I'm not there, so I can't verify it. But Human Rights Watch has a long history of documenting alleged Israeli crimes. And so it would not surprise me that, as we've seen in previous wars, that it had been used in this war. As the former executive director of Human Rights Watch, Ken Roth, told me on my show earlier this week, the war crimes of one party in a war do not justify the war crimes of the other. And so whatever war crimes Hamas committed, which they certainly did in targeting civilians in their attack on Israel on Saturday, that is a war crime. That does not justify Israel committing war crimes. And now, with the white phosphorus allegation, with the collective punishment that is clear for the world to see that there are 2 million people deprived of electricity, deprived of food and water, unable to leave, that is a form of collective punishment under international law. Again, clear as day, considered to be a violation of international humanitarian law. So you're in a situation right now where both sides are committing war crimes, and the people, the civilians on both sides, are the ones that are suffering. Yeah,
and in the last hour, we had author Nathan Thrall on, and he was making the point that the U.S., by not publicly telling Israel not to invade precipitously in moments from now, hours from now, days from now, we're not sure when, but soon, is in turn complicit in war crimes. Does it surprise you that, I mean, the Biden administration, we're getting a lot of different reporting. The State Department is saying there has been no private urging of Israel to do anything. Publicly, they are saying Israel has to do basically what Israel has to do. We hope that they abide by the rules of war. That's what we do. That's what we expect them to do. But beyond that, this is an administration that has taken a very shoulder-to-shoulder stance with Israel in this hour, where, understandably, Israelis are grieving. It is a heinous attack, the worst potentially in the country's history. So I guess I wonder, do you think that the ground invasion could imminently change that calculation for other nations?
The notion that American government officials or Western government officials simply tell Israel follow the rules of law and then they do is, quite honestly, just a fallacy. And let's be very clear about that. America says it follows rules of law, rules of war. And we saw what happened in Fallujah and Haditha. We know what happens in Guantanamo Bay. We know what happens in Abu Ghraib. So it's not as simple as just simply saying, oh, we expect them to follow the rules of war and international, and countries do it. That's just not the reality. When you have European officials, specifically British officials, incapable of saying or unwilling to say that the forced displacement of 1 million people to leave within a span of hours is a violation of international law or not. When you have international organizations on the ground saying that is impossible, this is a violation, it makes the reality ambiguous. And that is very troubling. When you don't speak with clarity about what is international law, then you can't turn around and expect people to follow international law. You can't turn around and expect countries and participants in war to be clear about what international law is going to be applied here and which ones are going to be violated. And that's part of the fundamental problem. I think Palestinians look at UN Security Council resolutions about the occupied territories having been neglected for years, not enforced, and Israel gets away with occupation settlements. International law is neglected all of the time in this conflict, and that has been a major source of the problem. And honestly, it kind of weakens the international rules-based system, because Russia then exploits it in its invasion of Ukraine, and other countries say, well, the international law was violated here, they can get away with it in what they're doing in elsewhere, like places like Ukraine and what have you.
There is so much embedded scar tissue and trauma and precedent in all of this.
It's very complex.
It's incredibly complex. It is, I want to say it's a fine balance to try and calibrate, you know, you can't calibrate how to do this. This is terra incognito.
And we're now in uncharted waters with the scope of this attack.
Absolutely. The brutality of it is unprecedented. But the retaliation is, well, we are looking down the barrel of something very, very dire. Ayman Mohideen, my friend, thank you so much for your time and thoughts and wisdom, as always.